Welcome to Taking the Tradition On. It's the first online storytelling talk show of its kind, as far as I know. And a big shout out to all my fantastic patrons who helped make this possible. Taking the Tradition On is free. I plan for it always to be free, and you can access all of the conversations afterwards. If you go onto my YouTube channel, Taking the Tradition On, there's some fantastic conversations there. Last month we had the amazing Philippa Namatobi Kabali Kagwa from South Africa, and talking about belonging and how you move to a new place, and lots of really interesting things about what makes a home and how you belong somewhere. The month before that was Tamer Eleanor Williams, and it was just a really moving conversation about minority languages and Welsh language and the difference between telling in our own language and English and mixing the two. Lots of fabulous conversations, and we particularly have a wonderful conversation coming up tonight. So we have been making our way around the world on this series. This is series 3 of Taking the Tradition On. And this series is We Are What We Tell. We've been to Morocco, we've been to Iran, we've been to Wales, and we've been to South Africa. And tonight we are going to Colombia. So please go wild for my wonderful guest, fantastic storyteller, traveller, tour guide, thinker and healer, the very, very marvellous Juliana Marin. Welcome, Juliana. It's so lovely to have you here tonight. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And everybody's beginning to clap and say hello.
Thank you so much, Amy. You're so kind.
Now, I know you're not in Colombia at the moment. At the moment, you're in Spain. You're an amazing adventurer. So I met you in Morocco in February. And you are travelling throughout Europe at the moment, and you've got as far as... tell us where you are right now.
Right now, I just finished doing a part of the famous Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James, which is a pilgrimage that has been going on since 900 AD or something like that. People walking from many different parts of Europe all the way to Santiago de Compostela, where it is said that the remains of the Apostle St. James are interred in the cathedral. And it has become a pilgrimage for people of all faiths and of no faiths, and just adventurers as well, people who want to find themselves, who want to find some sort of purpose. I only did 5 days of it. It's not actually starting from Santiago to what's called the end of the world, or where the sea begins, the end of the known world of the time. And it was just 5 days, about 90 kilometers walking. But you think a lot when you walk, and you tell yourself stories. And I came to the conclusion that I want my travels to be more than travels. I want them to be a pilgrimage. I'd never really done a pilgrimage before or known what the concept was. And I love to travel. I travel a lot. I'm a traveling storyteller, really. Wherever I go, I try to collect stories that I find there and drop stories along the way like seeds. But a pilgrimage is a journey with a purpose. I still don't know quite what my purpose is for this journey, which is open-ended, because I have no idea when the road will lead me back to Colombia. But I think I'll find the purpose on the way.
Well, I hope so. And I think you found several purposes. I mean, you already set out, like you say, with this purpose of planting stories like seeds. And I love that, and that thing of just going out and finding anybody who will listen, and just not the usual tight storytelling community, but just inviting everybody in and finding who your traveling companions are, and sharing stories with maybe just one person or a whole group of people. I think that's a pretty good purpose, actually. And maybe we'll have another conversation about that, because that feels like quite an important conversation. And pilgrimage is something that is on a lot of people's minds and tongues, and pilgrimage is definitely something that every year people talk about more and more and feel drawn to, I think. But tonight we're going to talk about Colombia and storytelling in Colombia. And until I met you, I have to confess, I knew next to nothing about Colombia. I know a little bit more now, still not a great deal. And I'm just really interested, if anybody here, what your preconceptions of Colombia are, what you might know, what you've heard, anything that you associate with Colombia, if you know very much about it, if you want to stick in the chat, if you're kind of like, and me, know very little at all, or if you've ever been there, maybe, kind of, who are we talking to? What do you already know about Colombia? Well, the keyboard ninjas are there kind of going, I can't type this fast now. She needs to
Colombia,
give
the
me a warning
country of
of these
South
questions.
America, by the way, not the university or the capital of Maryland. Is it the capital of Maryland? I don't know. It's a city.
Well, this is one of my rookie mistakes that I did. I have to admit, I spelt Colombia with a U instead of an O, and now I know it's Colombia, not Colombia, when you talk about the country. And I've made that mistake a lot, but I'm not going to do it anymore. So Achira is saying the nicest people.
Thank you, Achira. Achira is a friend that I met while telling stories in Cyprus, and she has been she is such a wonderful stories child, and I hope to meet her, to encounter her again in Italy soon.
Okay, Suzanne saying Encanto.
Oh yes, we're going to talk about that later for sure.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about Encanto, definitely. Well, and this is it. I think people have got a little bit more knowledge of Colombia since Encanto, and kind of just a little bit more of a feel of it. Everybody else is either typing huge long missives or just going, oh, I don't really want to admit, I don't really know, I don't want to look silly. Hi, Baden. It is lovely to have you here. So, Baden, we're expecting you to be an expert on Colombia, having spent a week with Juliana and listened to everything that she said. Cecilia's saying, I haven't been there, but a friend travelled there and loved it. Such lovely, friendly people, he said. Otherwise, I know nothing. So, I'm going to be the fall guy here because, I mean, like I say, I know nothing about Colombia. Before meeting you, if somebody said Colombia, the images that come into my mind, and I would know that they were stereotypes and not know if they were true or not, but things that are associations, maybe coffee. And maybe because of the coffee, I think of it being really lush and green, because maybe you see the pictures of that, you know, the coffee hills and, you know, that terrible Kenko advert.
I haven't seen it, I don't think.
No, well, you haven't missed anything. Drugs and trafficking and not knowing how much of a thing that really is, but kind of, you know, that thing about the Colombian traffickers that you get in dodgy sort of B-rate movies, that it's kind of quite mysterious and a bit edgy and a bit scary, or it's got that underbelly to it with then this lush greenness, and that is definitely something that I would question. Those are things that come into my mind and I'm going, I don't know. So what is Colombia like from the point of view of somebody who lives there? He can just give us a bit of a brief introduction to this country that we're going to be talking about.
Well, one of the things I want to mention is that really this negative reputation of the drug trafficking and the violence and the cartels and the war and all that kind of stuff, which is quite often what the only thing that people hear about Colombia. And I see that really nobody has mentioned that, probably because you don't want to offend me. And I really appreciate that, because it is very tiresome for Colombians to, whenever they travel abroad, when people hear that you're from Colombia, they're like, oh, cocaine, Pablo Squad, you know, those kind of things. And it can be quite tiresome to explain that Colombia is such an incredible place that is trying so hard to leave that story, to change that story, you know. But that is the story that is being told, and mostly it's being told by others, not by Colombians. There is one story that is very Colombian that I'd like to start with to maybe give you a little bit of a picture. And it's a story that a lot of Colombian storytellers tell. Of course, storytelling is alive and everywhere, but in Colombia, I've realized that it's a little bit different than in other places. And in Colombia, this story, the story of Marina and Marino, is a story that most storytellers tell a lot. You hear it in many different places. I heard it from several different sources, and I wasn't quite sure where the story came from, because some of the storytellers said that it was an indigenous tale from the Carib people of the Caribbean coast. Others said it was from the Waju nation. They're the ones that make these beautiful woven bags. They're from the northern desert peninsula, La Guajira. And I'll tell you after the story is over where this story really comes from. And it's a story that begins where many good stories begin, at the very, very, very beginning of the world, when everything was still new, and when Marina was the most beautiful woman who has ever walked the face of the earth. Ah, yes, Marina was not just beautiful, she was precious, she was life. Everybody loved Marina because Marina was a woman whose body was made entirely out of water. Everybody loved Marina, but the one who loved her the most was a handsome young man whose body was made entirely out of salt. And by pure coincidence, his name was Marino. Now, Marina and Marino loved each other, and they wanted to be together forever. But in every love story, there's a bit of a problem. The sun. The sun wanted Marina for himself, and he couldn't understand why she had chosen Marino. I mean, what did she see in him? He was just salt. I mean, he was the sun. He was so powerful. He was so hot. Well, he decided that he was going to take Marina and that she would thank him later. He knew what was best. But Marina heard of his plans. Water, after all, has friends in many places, and water can be even in the most hidden corners without noticing. And when Marina heard of the sun's plans, she and Marino held hands and ran all night to escape from the sun, to hide in the deepest caves. But salt doesn't travel very fast. And by the time the sun rose, they hadn't made it to the caves in time. Marina and Marino were trapped in a vast, expansive plain that stretched from horizon to horizon without even a shadow to hide under. Well, the sun started reaching for Marina, but Marino held on to her so tightly that their bodies became one vast body of water mixed with salt that stretched from horizon to horizon, filling the entire plains. Marina and Marino were together. They were safe. And that is why we have the sea, the ocean. But the sun wasn't going to give up so easily. The sun started to heat and pull on Marina. And Marina started feeling her body becoming lighter and lighter and rising up into the sky. She tried to hold on to Marino. Marino tried to hold on to her. But the sun was too powerful. And Marina was ripped away from the one she loved, from her home, from everything she knew. But just as she was about to be devoured by the sun's blazing heat, the enemy of the sun saw what was happening. Now, if you're a storyteller and you know about folk tales, about legends, about Aesop's fables, or the Japanese myths, you will know that the enemy of the sun is the wind. People generally think it's the moon, but if you think about it, the moon has never done anything to the sun, and she's always following him around. No, the wind is the one who is blowing clouds in front of the sun's face, trying to cover the sun, make people in some places forget that there is such a thing as the sun at all. And when the wind saw that the sun was about to obtain what he wanted most, the wind decided he was not going to let him have it. And so the wind began to blow and blow with all the force of a hurricane. And the sun tried to hold on to Marina, but she was blown back and forth until finally she slipped through his fingers and fell. Until she was dashed to pieces against the rocks of the highest mountains. She was completely and utterly destroyed. And yet, she did not die, because Marina's love was so strong that even though she had been broken into a million tiny little fragments, droplets of rain that had scattered all over the world, every place the little broken piece of her body fell, she left a bit of life behind. And it is because of that, because of Marina's broken body, of the rain all over the world, that we have flowers and fruit trees and the lush jungles of Colombia. And not only that, But even though she had been scattered far, far away, she still remembered the way back home. And every little drop started seeking for the down hills, the crevices and the rocks, finding its way, going down, down, down. And every time one little drop would meet up with another little drop, both little broken pieces of her body would join together, becoming bigger and stronger, finally becoming streams and then rivers, laughing and dancing and splashing and singing all the way back down to the sea, where Marino waited for her with open arms. They were together again, and they were safe until the next day when the sun rose again. And once again, the sun heated, and once again, the wind blew, and once again, Marina was dashed against the rocks. And so it continues to this day. But no matter how many times Marina is broken into pieces, she always, always puts herself back together, and she always, always finds her way back home. That is why they say, to this day, why by the side of the sea, the sun is almost always so hot. That's also why they say, to this day, why up in the mountains, the wind always blows so strong. And that's also why they say, to this day, why we, the children of Marino and Marina, whenever we cry, whether it's out of sadness or joy, the tears that come from deep inside of us are a mixture, so that we will always remember that we are made of water, salt, and so much love.
Yay! That is such a beautiful story. And I love that when that's the way that I tend to think as well, that kind of when you're asked a difficult question of how do I explain a country? How do I explain a place? How do I do a big concept? The only way for me to try and talk about those sort of things is through story, or at least to have that as a starting point. And I can see why you might tell that story about Colombia, but I'd love you to tell us more about why you chose that one.
I think there are many reasons why this has become such an emblematic story for me about Colombia. And one of the reasons is where this story actually comes from. You know, I was so happy to find this story because whenever I travel abroad, people always ask me to tell them Colombian stories. And honestly, that's not that easy because Colombia doesn't have a very extensive, rich, ancient folktale tradition as many other countries do. Because 500 years ago, when the Spaniards came and conquered everything, a lot of the indigenous people, well, many of their stories were lost, right? And the indigenous stories that remain, you don't hear them as a non-indigenous Colombian. In fact, as kids, we don't grow up with Colombian stories. We grow up with Greek mythology and the Brothers Grimm. And so when I found this story, I was so happy because it's like, okay, this is a story that I like because I only tell stories that I like. This is a story that I like, a story that means something to me, and a true, authentic Colombian story. And it's an indigenous tale. I don't know if it's from the Carib people or from the Waju. I'll ask my storytelling teacher because there's a big, beautiful storytelling school in Colombia. I'll talk about it later. And I'd heard him tell this story. So I asked him, Jota Villasa, if he knew where this story came from. And he said, oh, yes, I wrote it. And I was like, oh, I was so upset. I was so mad because I really wanted this to be an ancient, authentic, traditional Colombian story, you know, one that has survived the passage of time and war. But only later did I realize, well, this was perfect. This is how it's supposed to be. Yes, it is inspired by some indigenous things, by a bunch of different things of Colombian culture. It's a mixture. It's new. Because you see, when your stories are taken from you, you have to go out and make your own. And I've also been realizing over time that, well, Colombia is Marina, because Colombia is a country that has been broken into pieces so many different times. And no matter what happens, the Colombian people, if you meet Colombians anywhere in the world, overall, Colombians are really happy, friendly, loud. I've heard us described as annoying. Colombians that are always partying and dancing and making noise and music, even if it's out of tune, and just really celebrating life. There's even an expression that people say, pero nadie nos quita lo bailado, but nobody can take away from us what we have danced. That means, no matter what happens, even if we're in the worst, even if we lose everything, they can't take from us the experiences that we have had, the joy that we have lived. You can't take away for you what you have already danced. And that is something, probably the thing that I admire most about Colombia and about my people, really, is that putting themselves back together and always leaving life and light and love behind. For those of you who don't know much about Colombia, some of the stereotypes are true, though not in the way that you've been told. Colombia has gone through some very hard times. The war is still going on, actually. And the drug trafficking and the drug trade has destroyed the country in so many different ways. You see, that's probably one of the things that you may have heard differently. Quite often, outside of Colombia, people think that the drug trade has been something good for the country because it's brought in a lot of money. But no, because most of the money is going to the illegal armies it's fueling the war. It's destroying the country in so many different ways. And I don't know a single Colombian, not a single one, who was, myself included, of course, who has not lost a friend or a family member to the violence the drug trade has created. We are an entire nation that can see Thestros, for those of you who get the Harry Potter reference. And despite that, despite everyone having their own story, their own quite terrible story often, I've only realized how terrible it is, going out and traveling and talking about it with other people and seeing their looks of horror and realizing, oh yeah, that's not normal. Despite that, Colombians always pick themselves back up. And that's something interesting about storytelling in Colombia, because in many other countries, I've seen that storytelling is generally something for children, something sweet and family friendly, educational, something that you'll find in schools and libraries and folk tales and things. And sometimes I'll even be asked to sugarcoat a story. Like, I've had schools or summer camps review the stories that I'm planning to tell and say, oh, not that one because it includes a scene of domestic violence and it might be triggering to some children. Or, oh, on this story, could you make the man somehow escape instead of be eaten by the monster at the end? Which I don't do. I don't change the stories for that. Sometimes you need to tell those things. Generally, in other cultures, storytelling is for children. In Colombia, hardly anybody tells stories for children. You find stories and storytelling in the public universities. Storytellers are almost always, no, the majority are young, very young, and telling to the young in their 20s. Storytelling is generally considered rather revolutionary almost, because it's the way to say the things you cannot say. And that's what art has always been, everywhere, especially in places where the law of silence can reign. And so you use art to communicate through symbols the things that might not be quite safe or comfortable enough to simply say out loud. So you can use graffiti, you can use dance, theater, or of course storytelling And all of these art forms in Colombia are part of the world of the young because they're a way to communicate generally a very hard hitting message to denounce what's wrong with society, what needs to change. It's very often to go to a storytelling performance in Colombia and be moved to tears because a story can only break your heart if your heart is already broken. I don't know if there's anything you would like to ask about this, Amy, or we're
Mm.
kind of lost track a little bit, I guess.
Oh, no, no, it's fine. It was beautiful. Everything that you've been saying is really beautiful. I mean, so from everything that you've said, I mean, the questions that instantly spring to my mind, and I mean, other people, you're welcome to kind of, put your suggestions or questions as well. Is it dangerous then to tell stories? If it's the way to say things that can't be said, is storytelling dangerous in Colombia?
No, I wouldn't call it dangerous, and certainly not now. Because, see, precisely because of the people who have risked and even given their lives, we have been able to get to a point where we can start talking about these things. Because some years ago we couldn't. For example, in my city, Medellin, which is the second largest city of Colombia, when I was growing up, that was literally the most dangerous city in the world. There were times in which there would be bombs every single day, sometimes as many as 10 bombs in one day in different parts of the city. There would be another homicide at least every hour. It would be relatively common to see dead bodies on the street. And just, I remember when I was 14, I made friends with a younger girl. She was 10 years old. She lived in a really bad neighborhood, Comuna 13, District 13, which is actually now the most touristic neighborhood of Medellin because of its story of resilience and transformation. And she was having breakfast at my house one day, and I said, "So how's your day been?" And she's like, "Well, my mom was really upset today because there were a lot of dead people." I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Yeah, there was another shootout between the guerrillas and the paramilitaries last night, and I counted 11 bodies on my way to school. One of them fell on my sister when she opened the door." And for her, this was completely nonchalant. This was just another day. That's what the reality was like. And 20 years ago, there were a lot of things that you could not talk about. I grew up with what we call the law of silence, in which it's not written anywhere and nobody had to teach it to you. But even as kids, you just knew that there were things you did not say. For instance, when I was 8 years old, once we were having a picnic in the mountains close to our house, what's now a nature park called Arvi that you can access by a metro cable. And I was exploring a little bit, and I ran into a guerrilla soldier, one of the illegal armed groups, with a machine gun in the forest. And I saw him and I recognized him. I knew he was one of the illegal armies, part of the illegal army, because of his boots. And I looked up at him and he was looking straight at me, like he'd seen me long before I saw him. And I just kind of nodded and he nodded back. And without saying a word, he knew that I was not going to tell anybody that he was there. And I didn't. I did it for years. Nobody had to tell me not to talk about these things. It's just something that you know. But now Colombia has gone through such an extraordinary transformation, a transformation that I have witnessed that has happened in my lifetime, that now for the first time, people are starting to tell these stories. People are starting to tell their version, not the Netflix version or, the Narcos version, because when the bad guy is telling the story, the bad guy becomes the good guy, right? And generally, that's the story that people have heard about Colombia, the story that is being told by the bad guys, because the good guys were too afraid to speak. And before, it did used to be dangerous. I was telling you, Amy, earlier about Jaime Garzon, who was a journalist and a comedian, who was one of the first people to openly speak out about a bunch of the, really call out things that were happening in the country and call out politicians and corruption and the head of paramilitaries and things like that. And he would use humor, and people would laugh until they cried, and then they would just keep crying because they finally understood. It hit home what he was really saying, what was behind the humor, right? And he said, the only reason they haven't killed me yet is because I make people laugh and they haven't quite understood what I'm saying. And something else that he said was, I dream of a country in which I can say when I die instead of when they kill me. Because of course, eventually they did. In 1999, when I was 11, Jaime Garzon was assassinated. And that was such a terrible blow to the country because it felt like they had killed the laughter, like they had killed the truth. But despite the fact that Jaime Garzon was gone, people did not stop speaking up. And a lot of people had to die in order for us to get to the point where we are now. Because Colombia now, it's extraordinary. Medellin, my city, from being the most dangerous city in the world, has gone on to be named the most innovative city in the world, winning that award in 2014. Crime dropped over 90% in less than 20 years. That's almost unheard of.
So,
And now, yes.
what was that change? Was his death part of that? Was it, instead of killing the laughter, actually it made it united people and made them step up? Or how did that flip? How did that change happen?
It was a lot of different people working on a lot of different things on the same time at the same time. There's several different reasons. Like in the tour that I give of Medellin, because I'm a tour guide there, in which I tell the story of the city and of the transformation of the city. And this is a tour that we couldn't have given 20 years ago, and that we still don't quite want to give in Spanish. We only give the tour in English because we talk about some subjects that are still rather taboo. The way we explain it is that a security platform was established, and once things became safer, by increasing military personnel and injecting a lot of money and putting military personnel at strategic areas all throughout the country, making the country safer to travel through, really attacking the illegal armies harshly and reducing their numbers, and really fighting against that, reducing crime overall started a snowball effect. But in Medellin also, we've had some pretty good mayors that have focused on developing the city in two major areas: education and public spaces, or specifically democratic architecture, which means finding the most problematic public spaces in the city and using architecture and art and education to flip those negative symbols around and turn them into something beautiful that people could enjoy. So for example, in the most dangerous plaza, an abandoned marketplace that had been taken over by all the junkies and the homeless people and the criminals and all that, that has been converted into a library park with fountains and forests and places to sit and things like that. The most dangerous neighborhood, Comuna 13, District 13, which I mentioned earlier, that this little girl was from, that neighborhood, several different projects there, including mega schools and another library park and a cable car, but also some electric escalators built into the hillside as a free public system of transportation for people not having to climb 300 flights of steps every day, but rather just riding an escalator. That was unheard of. They actually had to take the community leaders to shopping malls in the rich part on the other side of the city so that they could see what an escalator was, because they'd never seen one, right? Generally, you associate escalators to shopping malls or to, really the rich part. But now it's in one of the poor neighborhoods, free to access for the people. And that has had a huge transformation. And now the local artistic community has decorated all the walls with these extraordinary graffitis and murals that tell the story of what they've lived through symbols. For instance, there's, there was a military operation in that neighborhood that killed a bunch of civilians and a lot of people disappeared, and it was a really horrific thing. Operation Orion, in which Black Hawk helicopters were shooting from the sky and stuff. And they've portrayed that by painting two birds, two hummingbirds, wearing little military helmets and things. And so if you see a hummingbird with a military helmet, you're not going to know what that means. But if you know that it's representing the Black Hawk helicopter and the whole story behind it, see, it's a symbol, it's a story. So now that neighborhood, it's, full of people from all over the world that go to hear this story and to see these colorful murals. And now you can talk about these things. So little by little, piece by piece, and so many different people doing their part has brought Colombia and Medellin to where it is now. And that transformation, I think, is the most interesting thing about Colombia in general. That resilience, that picking yourself back up and putting yourself back together again, that never refusing to give, never giving up. And storytelling comes into this very much because it's a way of shifting the narrative, of taking a story of pain and turning it into something beautiful, something that's still heartbreaking to those who understand it, but that's also incredibly inspirational. Like, for example, the sculpture of the Tree of Life. That is one of the most powerful symbols to me of Medellin. It's a sculpture that is right outside a museum called the House of Memory. And it's the first and so far the only museum of its kind in Colombia. The concept was created and pushed for by the victims of the Colombian conflict, who said, we need a place to tell our story because we have to talk about what happened to us, and nobody's listening and nobody's paying attention and nobody cares and nobody even believes us and nobody even knows what's happening. And so this museum, which is a testimonial museum, not so much a historical museum, but rather a place for the victims to tell their stories, photographs, video interviews, and things like that. Outside that museum, there's a sculpture. And when you see it from a distance, it looks like a tree. When you come a bit closer, you realize it's not really a tree. It's many human bodies that are intertwined, that are reaching towards the sky. But if you come all the way up close enough to touch the sculpture, to see what it's made of, to look really, it's confusing. It's metal. It's lots of different pieces of metal that have been welded together. And you might not recognize them until you read the plaque. Always, always read the plaque. That sculpture, the Tree of Life, is made from the blades of 27,000 knives. Knives, switchblades, weapons that were given up by the gangs in the neighborhoods of Medellin when they came together and made peace. And they handed over their weapons, and instead of throwing them away or destroying them, these weapons were given to an artist, to a sculptor. And the sculptor, writing about it, says when he received them, some of the knives still had blood on them. These knives have killed people, but he cleaned them up and he welded them together into the shape of bodies, into the shape of a tree reaching towards the sky, a tree of life. That, to me, is one of the most powerful stories and symbols of the transformation of Medellin and of Colombia, and of how the Colombian people have taken something that is so harsh and painful and tragic, really, and made something beautiful out of it. Because when I say the law of silence, I mean that there are things you do not talk about. You don't talk about them openly. Oh, but we've always talked about them through art. Always, always. And now we can keep talking about them without worrying that will disappear, because now people are listening.
Wow, 27,000 knives. I mean, it's just a huge number. And just a huge number of lives and stories. I mean, it's just, and it is beautiful that that's now just one sculpture. And what what is it like for people to be able to tell their stories and being able to? I mean, it's a very sort of different thing. I mean, the closest that I've experienced with anything like that is kind of collecting reminiscence stories from. And when I first began as a storyteller, I did a lot of reminiscence, and those days there were a lot of people who were still adults in the Second World War. I mean, now most of the people who were involved in the Second World War are gone, and if they're around, then they were children. They have a very different relationship with that time. And I talked to people who kind of were telling their story for the first time in 40 years, 50 years. They'd never told it before, and they could tell it to me because I was a stranger and I wasn't related to them, and there was a certain amount of distance. And I know that with my own grandfather, I was really grateful to somebody else for recording him and for collecting his stories, because he wouldn't have been able to tell them to me. He wouldn't have been able to share that horror and those stories. That's not something that you tell to your loved ones. Um, the atmosphere is okay now to tell those stories, but can people are they, because it can take so much time to actually be able to, when you say something out loud, you make it real a second time. I mean, how are people dealing with that?
Well, I'm a storyteller in two different ways. I'm a storyteller in the traditional sense of collecting folk tales and legends and myths from all over the world and telling them when I travel and such. But I'm also a storyteller in the sense that I'm a tour guide with an amazing company, Real City Tours, the best one ever. If you go to
Of
Medellin, you definitely
course.
have to take one of those tours.
And
And
it's now sounding like somewhere we all want to go. So,
it's an incredible city. It really is, specifically because of the transformation. Like in the downtown itself, one of the things I say on the tour, there's little to see, but lots to tell. And with the cable cars that climb up the mountainside, and the the forests around. Oh, there's Paulo from Real City Tours. Oh, great to see you, Paulo. Thanks for tuning in. He's so Paulo's my boss, and he's actually the one who created the tour that I'm going to talk about. He
hello,
started this
Pablo.
on his own.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing the link as well.
And he's an incredible storyteller himself, because he has found a way to tell the story of Medellin and of the Colombian people in a way that's very, very moving, not just to those who listen to it, but even to us as guides. And so I'm not just a storyteller in the traditional sense, but also as a tour guide, leading people around these places where before you would never see foreigners, ever. And even today, the people downtown in Medellin are so excited to see people from other countries, because, just the fact that people are starting to come visit, well, that shows that things have changed, that things are better, right? And that there's something in Colombia that's worth seeing. And so people are super friendly. It's common for people to come up and say hello and welcome, do you like Colombia and everything. And people wanting to take selfies with the gringos and stuff. Gringo is not a negative term in Colombia. It's simply used to refer to anybody who's not Hispanic. So I'm a storyteller in the sense that as a tour guide, I tell the story of a city and of people. And the only way to fully appreciate what Medellin is now, with the library parks and the murals and the color and the cable cars and the hiking trails and the new parks and everything, the only way to fully appreciate that is by seeing where it has come from. And I think that that's important. However, Very often, a coping mechanism for people who have been through trauma is to put it behind them and not look at it anymore. Like you're saying, a lot of Holocaust survivors only started talking about their experiences in their 90s, 40, 50 years after the war was over, after things are safe, right? Because when you go back and talk about it, when you think about it, you kind of live it all over again because stories feel real because they are, right? And so a lot of Colombians, the way that they would deal with that they still deal with this, myself included, is to just sweep it under the rug and forget about it and never touch it again. So, for example, when I was 12 years old, my grandfather was murdered during a break-in at our house, and we had to flee the country and stuff. We were one out of five Colombians has been forcibly displaced from their homes. One out of five Colombians is in exile or has lived in exile at some point. And my family was, I guess you could count that. So we fled the country for 2 years. And when my little brothers would talk about my grandfather, I would get up and leave the table. Like I could not handle it. I just did not want to talk about it at all. And there's still a lot of people in Colombia like that. And I can't blame them, right? It's like I met a Colombian woman who was living in Boston with her young daughter. And she was telling me, oh, yes. I was like, oh, where are you from in Medellin? And she's like, oh, from Comuna 13. And a look passed between us like, And she said, yes, we had to leave because of the situation. And I'm like, And her 11-year-old daughter asks, what situation, mommy? And her mother kind of freaks out and says, oh, there weren't any jobs. I'm like, wow. Like, this girl has no idea of what her mother has gone through and what things were like in Colombia. No idea at all, right? Because the mother has never talked to her daughter about them. And in fact, on the tour that we give in Medellin, when we talk about some of these really hard things, because we don't sugarcoat, the whole reason we call it real city tours is because we want to give as honest a perspective as we can of the city and show both the good, the bad, and the ugly. We show, there are still problems in Medellin, for sure, quite a few. Now, it's nothing like it was before, but in order to appreciate what we have now, you have to understand what it was like before. So talking about those things can be problematic, and that's one of the reasons we still don't like to give the tour in Spanish, because I think it's safe enough to say most Colombians would rather these things not be talked about at all yet. We have had a few issues with Colombians who are coming on the tour who get upset, who say, why are you going back and talking about all these bad things and the drugs and the violence, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows all that. We don't want to know about that. Talk about the good things. Show the good side. Why are you giving a negative impression to the foreigners? That's not the point at all. But I understand why they would think that. I understand that it hurts. But one thing that I've discovered in my own life and in my own journey through storytelling is that you can't heal something until you look it in the eye, until you face it. And it's only now that little by little, some people are starting to tell their story, and that's what the House of Memory, the museum, is there for. And now there is also a memorial to the victims of the Medellin cartel. And, little by little, there are beginning to be these spaces for people to speak up because it's safe enough to speak about it now. And one very interesting thing that none of us were expecting of us guides in Real City Tours, one of the side effects of giving that tour and about talking about these things is that occasionally tourists will ask us, what was it like for you personally growing up in the most dangerous city in the world? And we'll answer those questions. And for us, it was normal. When that's all you've ever known, you don't question it. But when you start talking about it, you realize that, oh, that wasn't normal. And you realize that it has affected you a lot more than you thought. In fact, the first time that I told the story of encountering that guerrilla soldier when I was 8, because somebody asked me something and I mentioned it on a tour, and I noticed my hands were trembling, and I was like, "What?" But this was years ago. Nothing happened. Literally, this was not a big deal. Why am I reacting this way? Because it was the first time I had ever told the story. And telling these stories more and more, you know, I realized the things in me have started to change. And talking with my fellow guides, I've heard the same thing. And none of us expected this. None of us set out giving this tour or telling these stories as a way of therapy. I don't think any of us see it that way at all, for sure. But by telling your own story, inevitably, you start to heal it. And I think that that is something that Colombia, little by little, is learning, because it's about time.
That is such a perfect note to stay on, I think, and to kind of officially finish that is just a really beautiful healing place. And there's so many things that we didn't talk about the school, about Encanto. Um, there are no questions.
Encanto, please watch Encanto. Encanto is the first time that I've seen a story about Colombia told in which violence is not the protagonist, in which it's so accurate and it's so beautiful and it's so magical, and Encanto is Colombia. It really is.
It is a really beautiful film, and I get it much more having talked to you. When I saw it, I was like, this is kind of the middle of a story. They kind of haven't done the beginning and they kind of haven't done the end. And then there's this whole kind of, there's a whole thing about, we don't talk about Bruno, obviously. It's like,
Oh yeah.
and I was like, this is kind of like, I like it, but it's kind of not a whole story. And then I went, it took you in, yep, okay, I get that. I get it now. You see why it's
If
exactly
you
the way it's expected
notice
to
in
be.
Encanto, the villains never have a face,
Yeah.
and that's on purpose. And I think that's beautiful,
Yeah.
because the villains aren't the protagonist of the story. The family is. And yeah, for Colombia, family is first.
Yeah, and I didn't the first time I watched it, I didn't get it, and like kind of the more I watch it, the more I really see those bits in it, and it is really beautiful. So yes, go and watch it if you haven't seen Canto. Go and watch it, and watch it after this conversation, and you will see it in a different light, I think. Nobody has put any questions up on the Q&A, so if you have a burning question that you just desperately need Juliana to answer, now is your opportunity, but you have a very short time because we are nearly out of time, so we will give you a moment for that. um Cecilia saying on the chat, this is so incredible. I'm struggling to find words, but I'm in awe of the power of the stories to heal and how you're using them to do this. And I think that's I think you've stunned everybody into silence because this has been so powerful and so moving, Juliana, and a window into a world that I think most of us who are gathered to. I mean, obviously, you have some people that know it very well. We have Pablo here, who is kind of obviously knows what you talk about, but I know some of the names that are regulars on Taking the Tradition on this is a new world and a new door opening to us, and the way that you are using stories and talking about stories is so moving. Baden's asking when you're coming back to tell the rest of your story. Like, an hour's just not long enough. We need a series, I think. Suzanne's saying, are there really Bruno characters in every household?
Yeah. Yeah, there's always kind of the family member that's a little bit weird and that something happened with them and that you don't talk about them. Yeah, there's always somebody, and it's generally an uncle.
Okay. And sadly, I'm guessing there's probably a lot of Bruno characters that you don't talk about because they're not in the walls and they're not coming back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we've talked about that before of the of that thing of living in the moment, and when people are gone, then you don't talk about them. And that's, I think that's something else that you're doing with stories, is starting, it's not just telling people's own personal stories, it's about starting to tell stories of people that are gone,
Mm.
and allowing them back into your lives rather than just having kind of cut yourself off from them. And that sounds incredibly healing and incredibly powerful and incredibly difficult as well, but just an amazing thing to be doing.
Well, but you see, that's what storytelling needs to be used for. I mean, it's in Colombia, you go to a storytelling performance and it's hit and miss, right? It might be amazing, it might be horrible. Like you don't know what you're going to get, but it'll probably move something in you, either one way or another. Uh, Quite often, what I've started seeing in storytelling in many other places is that you leave a storytelling performance and you say, well, that was nice. And that's kind of
Oh,
all you
oh,
get,
what a cutting comment.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think it almost feels like there's more censorship in storytelling in developed countries than there is in Colombia. But it's self-censored because people want to be politically correct and they don't want to step on the wrong toes and blah blah blah. And you need to take risks. At least that's the way I see it. You need to talk about the hard stuff. That's what stories are for.
I utterly agree. And I mean that's one of the things that this space hopefully is for. And one of the things that I wanted to start having, taking the tradition on, so we have an hour to be able to get into some of the nitty gritty and the conversations, and to give space for that, and to acknowledge that this is an adult space. This is we can talk about how we feel about things, if things are right or not, or how we approach things. There are things that I don't want to say in stories, but I still want to talk to them outside stories, and kind of, maybe say that this is a definite decision and this is why I'm making it. um and I think absolutely storytelling is for the hard stuff. And I can't imagine anything worse than somebody going out of a storytelling and going, that was nice. And I've done it, but it's like, what an insult. That was nice. Please don't do that to me. You just, like, if you want to insult me, that is the way to do it. Just go past me very loudly saying that, and it'll be cut to the quick. Norman saying this is fantastic actually. Norman saying, I learned this Buddhist saying years ago and I'm just beginning to understand it. The wound is where the healing begins. Yeah, those are wise words. Absolutely.
Well, you have to speak from the scar, not from the wound.
Baden's just being evil on purpose.
What did he say?
He has his tongue firmly in his cheek, I think. Baden says, always wonderful to see and hear you, Juliana. That was nice. Thank you, Baden. Right, you can go now, Baden. Thank you very much for your company. Janet's saying, walking through the souk in Marrakesh, Juliana explained to me the significance of a Colombian story of the tall lady. Her talk today has deepened my understanding of difficult stories. Thank you, from Janet. So, Achira is saying this, I think, in not in a tongue-in-cheek way, but really nice, Juliana, and I always had faith that you are quite strong. Yeah, I think so. Juliana, thank you so much for being so open, so honest, and just really being wanting to share your stories, and to be so matter of fact about such an amazing, big subject, and a difficult subject as well. Just, it's been absolutely incredible to spend this hour with you. I was looking forward to tonight, and I knew that it would be challenging and difficult, but also wonderful and magical, and it has been all of those things. If you want to watch again, because I suspect that Juliana said so much tonight, you might want to hear it again, then you can. This tonight will be up on my YouTube channel, taking the tradition on, and it's just there. It'll be archived. It's free forever. And there's lots of other conversations up there as well. And if you want to get more involved with the conversation and decide suggest people that you'd like to see on Taking the Tradition, then you're very welcome to become a patron, where we have a bit more of a discussion about all of these things later. And Taking the Tradition on is always the first Tuesday of every month, so come back, and it's always free. The other thing is, obviously, you can do is follow Juliana Marin, and Achira Stories is the thing to look for. I don't know if you want to stick that, if I stick that in the chat. And you're on most forms of social media, aren't you, Juliana?
Yeah, I don't post things very regularly. I need to more, but yeah, Achira Stories.
So I'm
Facebook,
saying so it's
Instagram,
Achira,
YouTube.
not Achira. Sorry. Yeah, but you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram. I think are you on Twitter as well?
I think so, but I haven't used it in like 6
I think
years.
go for Facebook and Instagram in that case.
Okay.
And then you can see where Juliana is in the world, and maybe see some stories, and she'll post there if she's going to be telling anywhere, and you can listen to her. If you have any gigs coming up, then pass them on to me, Juliana, and I will tell people about them, because I know that people will want to hear more stories from you, definitely. And so that is it for tonight. Next month, well, I haven't told my patrons yet, so I can't tell anybody else, but next month is June, which means that in the UK it is Jubilee month. Things are going crazy for the Jubilee, and we are maybe less excited about that, but I am quite excited about celebrating and investigating the Commonwealth. Celebrating, maybe not the right word. Exploring the Commonwealth and the connections, and we feel like in a position, just over the last two years, that we're in a position where we've come to these Commonwealth commemorations, and where we can actually reach out and talk to lots of people in the Commonwealth and actually explore what we want to do with it. And this seems like a good moment to really examine that. So I'm not going to tell you quite who it is yet, but we'll be having a storyteller from the Commonwealth next month. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you most of all to my amazing guest, Juliana Marin. Thank you to everybody for being part of this conversation and joining us tonight. And we will see you next month. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.